Okay, so $269 trillion.
Yeah, that's a big number.
That's I mean, that's just, it's almost impossible to even fathom.
Yeah, well, it's an estimate, of course.
Yeah.
It's not like anybody's got a detailed budget
Right.
for sending 1 million people to Mars and keeping them alive. But
Keeping them
yeah,
alive.
it's not a weekend trip.
No, it's a whole...
It's a whole civilization.
It's like branching off humanity onto another planet.
And this document that you sent over
Yeah.
from José Julio Córdova
Jaramillo, yeah.
at Onto Eclectic Consulting System,
Right.
they take a really interesting approach to this whole thing.
Yeah, and I mean, right out of date, I just want to say, for
Yeah.
anyone listening who thinks that, like, we are anti-space exploration or something,
Right.
that's not it at all.
Not at all.
I mean, I think the idea of going to Mars is incredibly compelling.
Absolutely.
But this deep dive is more about looking at the big picture, you know?
Right.
Like, what are the stories we're telling ourselves about the future? Yeah.
And where we should be focusing our resources.
And the scale of the resources is just massive.
And the scale.
Yeah.
I mean, trillions of dollars, potentially.
Potentially. Yeah. And that's what makes this so fascinating is like,
Yeah.
with so many problems here on Earth.
Right here, right now, yeah.
Why are we so captivated by this idea of Mars?
Yeah, especially when there's no clear budget,
Right.
no guarantee that we can actually survive there long term.
Yeah.
And it's not even clear what the benefit is for most of life on Earth.
Yeah. So that's where this idea of conscious towns comes in.
Yeah, this is a very different vision.
Very different. Yeah.
Much more grounded.
It's not science fiction either.
No, this is using technology we have today.
Yeah.
Well-
Like right now, we could start building these things.
It's a way to reorganize how we live
Yeah.
using data, using ethical principles.
Yeah. And they call this guiding philosophy ontosynclecticism, which
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
it is a mouthful.
But it's basically about building better systems.
yeah.
It's like looking at what it means to exist.
Yeah.
What are the best ideas from different fields?
Right.
And how do we combine those to solve problems?
So like a blend of a bunch of different things.
Yeah, ontology, syncretism, eclecticism.
Yeah. Okay, so within that, there are two key systems that underpin this.
Right.
The conscious scientific economic system, the CSES.
Yeah, so imagine an economy
Yeah.
that isn't just about endless growth.
Right.
It rewards innovation,
Yeah.
but it also recognizes limits.
It puts a cap on taking and taking and taking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a point where enough is enough.
Right. And then the other piece of this is the system of administration of autonomous neighborhoods, or system AAN.
So this is about governance.
Yeah.
How do we make decisions?
Yeah.
And they're proposing that local leaders should be directly accountable for how well their communities are doing.
Based on data.
Based on data. Yeah, they have over 1,000 different factors that they're measuring.
Yeah, it's not just like GDP or something.
No. They're looking at stress levels, how people use their leisure time, the rate of new ideas being generated.
Oh, wow.
It's a very holistic approach.
It really is. And it's almost like this deep dive is a chance to kind of hit the reset button, you know?
Yeah.
Like, what if instead of focusing all this energy on this kind of far off
dream.
Yeah, what if we focused on the solvable problems that we have right here, right now?
And that's where conscious towns come in.
Yeah, because it's presented as this realistic,
Feasible.
ethical, and scalable alternative.
Compared to this Mars vision.
Yeah. So let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay, let's do it.
$269 trillion.
Where does that number even come from?
Right. So the document is very clear that this is not an official number from SpaceX.
Right.
And my guess is because they don't have a publicly available detailed budget.
It's probably not something they're eager to share.
Probably not. But this 269 trillion is a very well-informed estimate.
Okay, so how did they arrive at that?
Well, it's important to understand Elon Musk's goals, right?
Okay, so he wants to get 1 million people to Mars.
By 2050.
2050, that's ambitious.
Hugely ambitious. And he's thrown around some numbers in the past, you know?
Yeah, I remember something about like $100,000 per ton to transport stuff.
To transport 1 million tons of cargo.
Which comes out to
$100 trillion.
$100 trillion just for shipping.
Just for shipping. And there's been even wilder numbers thrown around, like 1,000 trillion.
Okay, but even if we just stick with that 100 trillion,
Yeah.
the document points out a huge flaw in that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
It's only looking at the cost of moving things from point A to point B.
It's like budgeting for a house by only looking at the cost of the lumber.
Yeah, you're forgetting the foundation, the plumbing, the electrical.
The roof, the windows, the
Yeah,
doors.
everything else that makes it livable.
And when we're talking about Mars, we're not just talking about shipping stuff.
No, we're talking about creating an entire life support system.
right? We need air to breathe water, to drink, ways to deal with waste.
Energy, food production.
Medical care governance structures.
It's a whole civilization.
And that's where that $269 trillion estimate comes in.
Okay, so walk me through that.
So instead of just looking at shipping costs, this estimate is based on a full infrastructure cost per person.
Per person.
Yeah, so it includes everything.
Everything needed to sustain a human life indefinitely on Mars.
The launches, the life support systems, the habitats, energy, food production,
Medical care redundancy.
backup systems for when things inevitably go wrong.
And then all the operational costs, the maintenance,
That's
the repair.
very interesting.
Okay, so that's a very different way of looking at it than just shipping cost.
Completely different, and it also takes into account the sheer amount of material that we need to send to Mars.
Right, because it's not just about the people.
No, it's all the stuff they need to survive.
So how much stuff are we talking about?
Well, Musk's earlier numbers seem to be based on about 1 ton of cargo per person.
1 ton per person?
Yeah, which seems a little optimistic.
A little bit, yeah.
Especially when you consider that NASA estimates...
NASA has much more experience with this kind of thing.
They do. And they estimate that for basic survival on a Mars mission, you need somewhere between 20 and 30 tons of cargo per person.
Wow.
That includes the pressurized habitats, the radiation shielding the equipment for growing food redundant systems.
It starts to add up quickly.
It does. So if you take that more realistic 20 to 30 tons per person,
Okay.
and you multiply that by 1 million people.
You're talking about 20 to 30 million tons of cargo.
Not just 1 million.
Okay, so that's a significant difference.
Huge difference. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
So when you take that $269 trillion model...
The one based on the full per-person infrastructure cost.
Yeah, and you break it down into a cost per ton.
Okay.
It actually aligns remarkably well with NASA's 20 to 30 tons per person figure.
It's interesting.
So it suggests that their estimate is actually in the right ballpark.
Okay, so we're not talking about 100 trillion anymore.
No, we're talking about something closer to 200 to 300 trillion.
That's a whole other level.
And it really highlights the difference in thinking.
Yeah.
Musk's earlier numbers were based on a shipping metric.
Moving boxes.
This $269 trillion model is based on actual civilization design.
Wow, so it's modeling human existence.
Not just logistics.
Right.
Okay, so even if we take that lower end estimate...
At 100 trillion.
Yeah, let's look at what that actually means in terms of the global economy.
Okay, put that in perspective for us.
So the document points out that the entire global GDP in 2024...
That's all the economic activity on the planet for a year?
Yeah, it was around $104 trillion.
And we're talking about spending almost that much on just getting to Mars.
And surviving.
Right.
Then you look at global liquid capital, which is the actual money available for investment across governments, private funds, wealth funds.
Okay, so that's like the money that's actually ready to be deployed.
Yeah, and the estimate for that is somewhere between $17 and $25 trillion.
So even if we liquidated everything...
Everything.
We're still way short.
Massively short. And then they bring up the U.S. federal budget, which is huge, right?
I mean, it's trillions of dollars.
It was around $6.4 trillion in 2024.
Still a drop in the bucket compared to this Mars plan.
And then they compare it to the largest infrastructure project ever undertaken, which is China's Belt and Road Initiative.
There was something like 1.2 trillion over 15 years.
And even that is dwarfed by Musk's most optimistic Mars cost projection.
So the document is basically arguing that even $100 trillion is practically impossible to achieve.
Without completely restructuring the global economy.
And this leads to a really interesting question that they pose.
Yeah.
They call it the credibility gap.
I love that.
It's this idea that we're willing to accept these unfunded trillion-dollar aspirations for a Mars colony.
Yeah.
But evidence-based projects here on Earth that could have a real impact often face so much scrutiny.
To get a fraction of that funding.
It's like we're more willing to dream big about space
than to solve problems here.
And it makes you wonder why.
It does. So the document then kind of shifts gears a little bit.
Okay.
And it looks at the track record of the person most associated with this Mars plan.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be a personal attack or anything. It's more like a performance audit.
A reality check.
Yeah, as of the first quarter of 2025.
Okay, so what do they find?
Well, they have this really fascinating section called Top 10 Musk Claims, Public Statements versus Reality.
Okay, lay it on me.
All right, so the big one, of course, is 1 million people on Mars by 2050.
Right.
And as we've discussed, there's no clear cost model, no concrete logistical plan, and those Starship test flights
They haven't exactly been going smoothly.
They've had some explosions.
So not putting humans in space just yet.
Not yet. Then there's the whole full self-driving thing for Teslas.
He promised that by 2018.
He did, and as of early 2025.
Still not there.
Not even close. They're still at level 2 autonomy.
Which means...
The driver has to be paying attention at all times.
Right, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is investigating.
They are. And remember that promise of 1 million robo-taxis by 2020?
Yeah, that was a big one.
That hasn't materialized either.
So just a lot of hype.
Yeah.
No real-world deployment.
Yeah. And then there's the Hyperloop.
The super high-speed transportation system.
That was supposed to revolutionize transportation by 2022.
Abandoned.
Pretty much the boring company's tunnels.
They're mostly being used for regular cars.
Yeah, nothing revolutionary there, and even Neuralink.
The brain-computer interface company.
Yeah, they were supposed to start human trials in 2020.
Didn't happen until late 2024.
And even those are raising some ethical concerns.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about that.
There is, and then there's Tesla solar roofs, which were supposed to be everywhere by now.
They're still pretty rare.
Yeah, and expensive.
Not exactly mass adoption.
And the list goes on.
Hit me with a few more.
Okay, so 100% solar-powered gigafactories.
Still relying on the grid.
Very much so. The Tesla Semi was launched with a lot of fanfare in 2019.
Yeah.
But deliveries didn't really start until 2022, and they've been very limited.
Not exactly a game changer.
The Tesla Bot, the humanoid robot,
Still just the prototype.
and even the Cybertruck.
Remember all the hype?
All the hype, low delivery numbers, reports of quality issues in production was reportedly paused in 2025.
So not quite the revolutionary pickup truck it was supposed to be.
Not quite.
Okay, so beyond these specific promises,
Yeah.
what else does the document highlight?
So they point to what they call organizational red flags as of
Okay.
early 2025.
Okay.
Things like those Starship explosions, the halt in Cybertruck production, and the departure of several high-profile people from both Tesla and SpaceX.
So engineers, designers, leaders?
Yeah, people who were really key to those companies.
Okay, so they're painting a picture of some instability.
Yeah, and they frame all of this as highlighting what they call the real cost of tech mythology.
Okay, explain that.
It's this idea that when we buy into these big, bold promises,
Unverified promises.
it can distract us from more pressing issues.
And misallocate resources.
Exactly. It's like all that capital, all those brilliant minds, all that energy.
Could have been focused on something else.
Like addressing homelessness, building more resilient cities, creating sustainable infrastructure, regenerating our planet.
Right, so it's not just about whether Musk can deliver on his promises.
It's about the opportunity cost.
The things we're not doing because we're focused on this one vision.
Exactly, and that's where conscious towns come in.
Okay, so they're offering a different path.
A more grounded path, and they frame it as a responsible redirection of civilization's strategic capital.
So instead of a space race,
It's a conscious allocation of resources
money, talent, innovative thinking.
towards a more sustainable future.
Okay, so how do they compare the two approaches?
So they basically lay out this side-by-side comparison.
Head to head.
Yeah, across several different categories.
Okay.
And they start with cost transparency.
Which we've already talked about.
Right, for the Mars plan, it's a big X.
No publicly available cost model.
For conscious towns, they estimate $1 to $5 billion per prototype,
Per town.
with a long-term vision of a $40 trillion global investment cap.
Which is still a huge number.
It is, but it's spread out over time.
And across multiple projects.
Exactly. Then there's technological readiness.
Okay.
Another X for Mars because of those unproven closed-loop life support systems.
Right.
Conscious towns get a check mark because they're relying on existing technologies.
Things we already know how to do.
Renewable energy, water purification, sustainable agriculture.
Proven stuff.
Yeah. Then there's human compatibility. Mars gets dinged for the radiation, the low gravity, the potential for psychological stress.
Living in a tin can on a barren planet.
It's not exactly ideal for humans.
No.
Conscious towns are designed to work with human biology and culture as they've evolved on Earth.
So more compatible with our needs.
Yeah, than scalability.
Okay.
So the Mars plan is seen as having this huge planetary scale risk.
If something goes wrong.
It could be catastrophic for the whole endeavor.
Right.
Conscious towns are more modular.
They can adapt to different regions and cultures.
Exactly. So they're more scalable in a less risky way.
Okay. And what about governance?
Yeah, that's another big difference.
Mars.
No clear governance framework.
Who's in charge? What are the rules?
It's all very vague.
Whereas conscious towns have the system AAN
With its focus on civil contracts and those extensive KPIs.
and the CSES, the capped return economic model.
So it's much more clearly defined.
And finally, return on investment.
Yeah, for Mars, it's highly speculative.
No clear timeline.
And the potential returns are very uncertain.
Whereas conscious towns,
They're projecting a social ROI of 15–30%.
which mean
They're looking at the benefits to society, not just financial profit.
things like reduced crime rates, improved health outcomes, increased social cohesion.
Exactly. And they're projecting a financial payback period of 5 to 10 years for their initial prototypes.
Okay, so they're making a case that this is not just a pipe dream.
It's a viable investment.
With real-world returns.
And they lay out several key reasons why they think conscious towns can be successful.
All right, I'm listening.
So they're based on scientific principles.
Okay.
They're designed to be culturally adaptable.
So they can work in different parts of the world.
Exactly. They're financially viable through ethical investment and public-private partnerships.
So not just relying on government funding.
Right. They have built-in governance mechanisms and real-time data monitoring.
So they can adapt and adjust as they go.
And crucially, they're focused on resilience.
The ability to withstand shocks and disruptions.
Climate change, economic downturns, pandemics.
The challenges of the 21st century.
Exactly. And they argue that conscious towns are designed to address the root causes of those challenges.
Okay, so what are those root causes?
Well, they point to climate change, social breakdown, economic inequality, mental health crises, and our current extractive economic model.
This is a very holistic view.
Very much so. And it leads to what they call the ethical imperative.
Okay, I like that.
It's this idea that we have a choice to make. A gamble on a distant planet, or a focus on healing and regenerating our home.
And they're advocating for the latter.
They are, and they call for what they describe as elegant skepticism and supercultural maturity.
Okay, break that down for me.
So it's about moving beyond being impressed by big visions.
The hype.
Yeah, and instead demanding concrete evidence, measurable outcomes, a realistic path to implementation.
Show me the day.
Exactly. They're saying we need to value quiet competence and transparent ambition over what they call big mouth leadership.
So let's talk more action.
And more importantly, results.
Okay, so the document then brings it back to the central question.
Yeah, how do we best allocate our resources?
Between Mars and conscious towns.
Right, and they reiterate the core objectives.
Maximizing return on investment, minimizing risk, aligning with ethical principles.
And they highlight the specific needs that this analysis is trying to fulfill.
A financial comparison, a risk assessment, a roadmap for implementation, a framework for governance.
And they pose that key strategic question.
Where should we be directing our efforts?
And they make a very strong case for conscious towns.
Based on feasibility, ethics, scalability.
And they lay out a phased implementation plan.
Okay, so how would that work?
So phase 1 from 2025 to 2035 focuses on developing 20 pilot towns. And they actually mention some specific locations, Queens and Brooklyn and New York City and Riverside.
Interesting choices.
And then phase 2 from 2035 to 2045 is about building regional federations of these towns and scaling up to a total of 100.
So expanding the network.
And then phase 3 from 2045 to 2050 envisions over 200 interconnected towns forming this global regenerative system.
A network of conscious towns.
Exactly. And to really highlight the differences, they include this strategic comparison table.
Okay.
That summarizes all the key factors for both the Mars plan and the conscious towns model.
Investment returns, timeline, viability, governance.
All of it, and the contrast is pretty striking.
So they're making a clear argument for one path over the other.
They are, and they emphasize that this isn't just a practical decision.
It's about the future of civilization.
What kind of world do we want to create?
And they're advocating for clarity, courage, and intelligent design.
And they see conscious towns as a pathway to ethical prosperity, effective governance, and positive cultural evolution.
So it's a very hopeful vision.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about their methodology a little bit.
All right, so they briefly describe their multidisciplinary evidence-based approach.
Which involves
Financial forecasting using key performance indicators, detailed feasibility modeling, and simulating risk scenarios.
So they're trying to be as rigorous as possible.
Absolutely. And when they analyze the financial risks of the Mars plan, they point to the massive costs, the difficulty of securing funding, the uncertain returns, and the opportunity costs.
All the things we've discussed.
Right. Whereas for conscious towns, they highlight the more manageable costs, the potential for ethical investment, and the clearer path to ROI.
Okay, so financially, they see conscious towns as a much safer bet.
Yeah, and on the technical side, they point to the risks associated with Mars.
Transportation and life support systems, energy production, habitat construction.
It's a lot of unknowns.
And a lot of potential for things to go wrong.
Whereas for conscious towns, they emphasize the advantage of using existing technologies.
Tried and tested.
Yeah, then there's the biological risks of Mars.
Radiation, low gravity, psychological stress.
Living in an enclosed environment for
Is
years.
not exactly natural for humans.
And all of those are non-issues with conscious towns.
Okay, so biologically they're much more compatible.
And they also mentioned the use of those KPI dashboards
They track progress in real time.
and compare the impact of both approaches.
Data-driven decision-making.
Exactly. And within the Conscious Towns framework, they stress the importance of resilience metrics.
Okay.
So they're using red team, blue team exercises
To try to break the system.
and find weaknesses, and they're doing audits for potential black swan events.
Those high-impact, low-probability events that nobody sees coming.
So they're trying to be as prepared as possible.
Okay, so let's focus on that strategic roadmap.
All right, so phase 1, the initial 5 years, is all about developing those pilot downs.
20 prototypes.
And the goal is to validate the core systems, the governance models, and the potential for positive societal transformation.
Prove that it works.
Yeah, and they have some key actions for this phase.
Like what?
Securing the land, constructing the modular infrastructure, implementing the system AAN and the CSES, and launching those superculture programs.
Superculture program.
Yeah, they're designed to foster social cohesion and a sense of shared purpose within the communities.
Interesting. So it's not just about the physical infrastructure.
No, it's about building a new kind of society.
Okay, and they have some ambitious KPIs for this phase.
They do so achieving cost efficiency targets in construction and operation,
All right.
reaching 100% self-sufficiency in renewable energy production,
Wow.
achieving a 70% reduction in homelessness within the pilot communities, demonstrating a 30% improvement in their human potential index,
Which is
a
a
measure of well-being and social progress, and achieving a social return on investment of 15–25%.
Those are some pretty high bars.
They are, but they're also very specific and measurable.
So they can track their progress.
And they're projecting a financial return on investment within 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
A combination of direct revenues from things like housing, energy production, educational programs, and other services,
Okay.
as well as indirect returns like reduced healthcare costs, lower crime rates, and increased productivity.
So they're looking at the big picture.
The full economic and social impact.
And they're even providing projected outcomes for those specific pilot regions.
Yeah, for Queens, they're anticipating a 70% reduction in homelessness, 95% renewable energy self-sufficiency, and a significant increase in community cohesion.
Wow.
For Brooklyn, they're projecting a 30% decrease in crime rates and a big reduction in unemployment.
Okay.
And for Riverside, a 60% increase in access to mental health services and a 35% decline in reported cases of depression and anxiety.
So those are all simulations.
They are, but they give you a sense of what they're aiming for.
The potential impact.
Right. And then in their conclusion, they restate that fundamental difference between Mars and conscious towns.
The high-stakes uncertainty versus the grounded data-driven approach.
And their executive recommendation is very clear.
Okay.
Immediate investment in conscious town prototypes.
Okay.
Enactment of a Conscious Town Act to create the legal and regulatory framework.
To smooth the path.
And the formation of regional federations, eventually leading to a global Conscious Town Federation.
A global network.
And they even outline a proposed governance structure for this federation.
Wisdom.
Performance metrics from the system AAM.
So not traditional politics.
Right, with weighted voting rights and clear processes for dispute resolution and citizen participation.
So a more direct form of democracy.
And they address the integration of advanced technologies like AI and neurotech.
Which is important.
Because those technologies could be very powerful.
And potentially dangerous.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
they're calling for AI alignment audits, citizen oversight bodies, and adherence to a neuroethics charter.
To make sure those technologies are used responsibly.
And they even mention potential collaborations with groups like OpenAI Ethics Labs and the AI Now Institute.
So they're trying to bring in outside expertise.
And they detail their strategies for ethical investment and capital allocation.
Things like ESG funds, impact bonds, and the capped return and reinvestment protocol of the CSES.
Where excess profits are redirected to things like healthcare education and environmental regeneration.
Under the oversight of citizen oversight councils.
So they're trying to create a system that benefits everyone.
Not just a select few.
And finally, they call for a global public relations and narrative reframing effort.
To change the story.
Yeah, to emphasize the prioritization of Earth and the regeneration of civilization.
A new vision for the future.
And they suggest potential collaborations with influential figures.
To get the word out.
And the document ends with this powerful call to action.
To invest in conscious towns to prioritize our planet, to regenerate civilization.
It's a very compelling vision.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
the contrast between that ambitious trillion-dollar Mars plan
Yeah.
and this Earth-focused conscious towns model is pretty stark.
It really is. And for me, the key takeaway is the massive, unproven nature of the Mars endeavor
The financial hurdles, the technological challenges.
versus the more practical, ethical, potentially more impactful approach of conscious towns.
It makes you think about where we should be focusing our efforts.
It does. What are our priorities as a civilization?
Which path offers a more feasible and ultimately more beneficial future for humanity?
Big questions.
Big questions. And if you're interested in learning more about some of these concepts, like ontosynclecticism, the CSES, the system AAN,
There are links in the document to the Conscious Towns website and José Julio Córdova Jaramillo's work.
and it really leaves you with this thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
Is humanity's future best served by reaching for the stars?
At an unimaginable cost.
Or by focusing on creating a thriving, sustainable civilization right here on Earth?
A lot to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
Stay curious.